In Luke chapter 11, verses 34 through 36, the eye is personified as the lamp of the body. When the eye is pure or single, as stated in the King James Version, it illuminates the entire body with light, reflecting the character and purity of the person. If the eye is unhealthy or diseased, as seen in the certain translations, and other modern translation that fills the person with darkness. This contrast of light and darkness emphasizes the need for spiritual clarity. When one's whole body is full of light with no part dark, the light shines brightly. Also in the same scripture, Luke 11:33 through 36, Jesus uses a striking metaphor to challenge his audience about spiritual perception. He says, "The eye is the lamp of the body," drawing a powerful connection between physical sight and spiritual insight. This passage isn't just for those gathered around Jesus at the time, but for all future readers and hearers of the gospel. It calls us to examine our own spiritual clarity, asking how we see the world and, more importantly, how we perceive divine truth. Jesus urges us to consider whether our inner vision is full of light or darkness, reflecting our relationship with God. Contrast between light and darkness, truth and ignorance also taps into ancient philosophical traditions. In Greek philosophy, for instance, light represented knowledge and truth, a concept famously explored in Plato's allegory of the cave. Likewise, in Jewish wisdom literature, light was often associated with divine wisdom and guidance. By invoking these images, Jesus challenges us to align our vision with divine light, ensuring that our spiritual sight is clear and unclouded by sin or worldly distractions. Ultimately, the passage from Luke 11:33 through 36 isn't just about physical sight, it's about how we see spiritually. Jesus calls us to reflect on whether our hearts and minds are open to God's truth. Just as a healthy eye allows light to enter and guide the body, a spiritually clear mind allows the light of God's wisdom to illuminate our lives. So, this message, especially for Luke's Gentile audience, is an invitation to embrace the light of the gospel and let it shape our spiritual vision. In doing so, we're reminded of the profound impact our perception of truth has on our lives and our journey toward righteousness. In the passages and including Matthew chapter 6, 22 through 23, each of these present teachings of Jesus that uses the metaphor of the lamp of the body to illustrate how one's spiritual outlook affects their relationship with God. While both passages share a similar core message, they differ significantly in wording, context, and emphasis. Both authors reflect their unique concerns and it comes from the gospel writer, Luke or Matthew. The most notable difference between the two passages is their setting. Matthew is part of the Sermon on the Mount, a broader discourse in which Jesus addresses his followers on moral and spiritual topics, emphasizing internal righteousness and spiritual purity. Here, the lamp of the body passage aligns with the larger theme of ethical living and the need for spiritual clarity. And in contrast, Luke 11:34 through 36 occurs after a series of confrontations with religious leaders, particularly the Pharisees. This passage falls within the context of Luke's woes to the Pharisees and lawyers, where Jesus warns against hypocrisy and the dangers of outward religiosity without inner transformation. This gives Luke's version a stronger tone of warning about spiritual blindness and the importance of self examination. So, when comparing the wording of the two passages, there are key differences in how the metaphor is presented in Matthew. Jesus simply states the eye is the lamp of the body and then contrasts a healthy eye with an unhealthy one. If the eye is healthy, the body is full of light. If it is unhealthy, the body is full of darkness. Matthew's structure is more straightforward, focusing on the relationship between the eye and the body. Luke, however, begins with the body saying, "Your eye is the lamp of your body," and places more emphasis on the body being full of light or darkness. So, this subtle shift in emphasis could suggest a deeper focus on how one's internal vision How they perceive spiritual truth affects the overall spiritual health of a person. Another key difference is the way the metaphor of the eye is implied or is applied. In Matthew, the healthy eye reflects spiritual purity, and when one's spiritual vision is clear, it leads to moral righteousness and ethical living. Luke, on the other hand, underscores the importance of guarding one's internal vision from spiritual blindness, particularly in the face of external influences like hypocrisy and false piety. The focus in Luke is not only on the individual's spiritual health, but also on how outward behaviors can corrupt that health if one's inner vision is clouded. The differences between the two passages also highlight the distinct theological concerns of the gospel writers. Matthew's audience, likely concerned with personal morality and the fulfillment of Jewish law, would find the metaphor of light and darkness applicable to their own ethical behavior and spiritual integrity. In contrast, Luke's audience, grappling with external religious pressures and the corruption of religious institutions, would have been more receptive to the warning against hypocrisy. Luke's focus on internal transformation reflects his broader concerns about social justice and the critique of religious authorities, while both passages present a similar message about the importance of spiritual clarity and the consequences of spiritual blindness. They are shaped by the different theological and literary priorities of Matthew and Luke. Now we'll talk about the contemporaries of today or in our age, and their comments on this light and darkness and the metaphor of the eye as the lamp of the body. So we hear the text of Luke chapter 11, verses 34 through 36, and Matthew chapter 6, 22 through 23. Jesus uses the metaphor of the eye as the lamp of the body to explore the relationship between spiritual sight and moral clarity. So Carol explains that the eye serves as a metaphor for perception and understanding. And this idea suggests that a clear or healthy eye allows spiritual and moral clarity, while a bad or diseased eye results in spiritual blindness. Edwards adds that sight symbolizes both moral discernment and spiritual awareness. He notes that the eye is not just for physical sight, it also represents the capacity to perceive divine truth. This understanding positions the eye not merely as a physical organ, but as a profound spiritual symbol that shapes how we engage with the world and, more importantly, how we relate to God's truth. Jesus contrasts the healthy eye with the bad eye, and there are Greek terms haplos and paneros. Carroll explains that haplos, often translated as single or healthy, refers to clarity and focus. A healthy eye represents spiritual and moral clarity, a perception that is open and receptive to divine truth. In contrast, paneros refers to something corrupt, dysfunctional, or morally sick. It denotes an eye that is clouded, incapable of seeing things clearly, thus leading to spiritual blindness and misalignment. Edwards further explains that haplos is one that allows a person to see things clearly as well. And on the other hand, paneros is an eye that is turned towards selfishness, sin, and moral decay. This eye is spiritually closed off to divine truth, unable to see what is good and true. And Betts's interpretation adds another layer, suggesting that haplos can also imply a generous or virtuous eye, one that is focused on goodness and truth. The paneros eye, conversely, is aligned with self-interest and moral corruption. The contrast between these two terms highlights the deep connection between one's spiritual health and how they perceive the world. And then this distinction emphasizes the profound impact that our spiritual vision has on the way we live our lives and how we interact with others. When your eye is bad, your body is also full of darkness. So this phrase highlights the deep interconnection between spiritual perception and moral conduct. Carroll interprets the dark body as a symbol of spiritual blindness or moral confusion. What does the whole body dark mean? If the eye, which guides perception, is corrupted, the entire body, representing the person as a whole, becomes spiritually clouded and darkened. This suggests a life disconnected from divine truth, marked by confusion and error. Edwards expands on this interpretation, suggesting that the darkness in the body symbolizes a complete disorientation in one's life. Thoughts, actions, and behavior are all affected when spiritual perception is corrupt. When the eye is incapable of perceiving divine truth, it leads to moral disorder, causing a person to make decisions that are not aligned with God's will. For Betts, the darkness represents a complete moral and spiritual disorientation. When the eye is darkened by spiritual blindness, the whole person, mind, body, and soul becomes immersed in ignorance and sin. This imagery underscores the profound consequences of not aligning oneself with divine truth. A life without light is consumed by darkness. This teaching invites self-reflection. What does our spiritual vision reveal about the state of our lives? And throughout the Gospel of Luke, the imagery of light and darkness plays a central role in conveying spiritual themes. Carroll observes that light in Luke symbolizes divine revelation, salvation, and the presence of God's kingdom. Darkness, in contrast, represents ignorance, evil, and separation from God. And these symbols are used to illustrate the contrasting states of the individuals. Those who accept and embrace God's truth are depicted as being in the light, while those who reject it live in spiritual darkness. Edwards further elaborates on this symbolism, noting that light is consistently associated with spiritual enlightenment and truth. So, wrapping up, Luke's version of the saying about the eye as the lamp of the body differs significantly from Matthew's. While both Gospels share the metaphor of the eye as central to understanding one's spiritual health, Luke's version places a stronger emphasis on the theme of spiritual blindness and the consequences of hypocrisy. Matthew's version, in contrast, focuses more on internal purity and personal righteousness, with an emphasis on the clarity of spiritual vision. This difference likely reflects the distinct theological concerns of each gospel writer. Matthew's audience, often more focused on personal morality, would find the imagery of light and darkness as a call to ethical clarity, while Luke's audience, more concerned with social justice and the dangers of external religiosity, would see a critique of hypocrisy and self-deception in religious life. Understanding the historical background is crucial for interpreting this passage. In the first century world, light and sight were not just physical realities, but symbolic of spiritual insight. In Greco-Roman philosophy and Jewish thought, the eye was often associated with the soul, and light symbolized truth, wisdom, and divine knowledge. For Jesus' original audience, the idea that the eye could be healthy or diseased could have immediately connected to their understanding of moral clarity or blindness, respectively. So, this metaphor would resonate deeply with both the common people who often felt marginalized by religious authorities and the Pharisees who were frequently critiqued for their external displays of righteousness. For Jesus' audience, the meaning of the saying was a call to spiritual honesty and self examination. The light represented the truth and the revelation of God, and to have a healthy eye was to be aligned with this divine truth. A bad eye, on the other hand, was a sign of hypocrisy, someone who thought they were aligned with the truth but were instead blind to it, much like the Pharisees whom Jesus frequently criticized. For modern believers in Jesus, this saying still holds profound relevance. In today's world, where external appearances and material success can often obscure deeper moral and spiritual truths, the metaphor calls for a critical examination of how we see the world. Are we blinded by self-interest, pride, or social pressures? Are we open to God's truth and living accordingly? Or are we living in darkness, deceiving ourselves about our true spiritual state? The application for contemporary Christians is clear. Our spiritual vision must remain open to divine truth, and we must resist the temptation to place external appearances over true moral and spiritual health. In conclusion, the saying about the eye is the lamp of the body urges both Jesus' first century audience and modern Christians to be mindful of the way they see the world and their relationship with God. It calls for a deeper introspection, aligning one's spiritual perception with God's light and truth, and guarding against the darkness of self-deception and hypocrisy. Thanks for listening.